right. Go ahead and get us kicked off, but please introduce yourselves in the chat so we know. It's always lovely to see all the different places that people are calling in from coast to coast. So thanks for being here, everybody. As a reminder, I'm Susan Lightfoot-Schempf. I'm the Executive Director of the Food Systems Leadership Network. We co-host this Community Food Projects Community of Practice with ISED Solutions. So Emma Bliss is here from ISED, and Andy Fisher is usually with us, but Andy's in Utah today, so we'll send him some love. And we are so excited to have some amazing guest speakers with us today. We're going to be talking all about farm stops, which is a new concept for me. I've just been learning about in this last year. I'm really excited to learn more. So we have Kathryn Barr, Jessica Eikleberry, and Caroline Rogers, who are going to be sharing both kind of like the big picture of like what is a farm stop, and then giving some examples of what it looks like in practice, both from a farm stop that's been in operation for some time and one that's just getting started. So we're going to be learning about this model together. Just quickly before we get going, we always want to reground in the Food Systems Leadership Network's cultural agreements. So Emma, if you could please pull those up. Thank you. So these cultural agreements have held us for about 5 years now in a culture of community care. So it's always important to remember that we are stewards of culture every time we come together. And just want to invite everybody to take a look at these. I'll read them out loud real quickly. So we honor and celebrate our collective wisdom. Together, we know a lot. There's 65 plus people in here bringing so much wisdom and experience from our own lived experiences and our different communities. So each of you has something valuable to bring to this conversation. We are mindful of our power, privilege, and how much space we are taking up. We take responsibility for impact regardless of intent. We give grace to one another and approach conflict with curiosity. We challenge assumptions, respect our differences, and speak from our own experience. We honor confidentiality, lessons leave, stories stay. We take care of our own physical, mental, and emotional needs, and we meet each other where we are. Showing up is enough, and listening is participating. So thank you for helping to steward these cultural agreements in this space and conversation today. A couple of other quick reminders. Just love to see faces. So thank you to those of you who have your cameras on. It's really nice to see other human beings. If you're in a space where you can turn on your camera, we would love to see you. Otherwise, if you can't, totally understand. Just a reminder for folks to stay on mute. We all know how tricky it can be being in a big Zoom call together. So if you're not speaking, just please make sure that you're still on mute. We are recording today. There was a lot of interest in learning about this model. And so we're recording the presentation and the panel discussion. Then we'll stop the recording for our discussion and Q&A just to allow some like informality in that part of the conversation too. I think that's it for kind of setup today. So um, we wanted to just like before we kind of get into the presentation about Farm Stop, just to pause and give us a minute to think about why this model that we're going to be learning some more about might be necessary in the first place. So put your thinking caps on. I'm going to drop a question in the chat and just invite you to take a minute to think about this, and would love to hear a couple of responses both in the chat, and if you want to raise your hand and unmute, we could hear from a couple voices. So the question is, acknowledging that many of you work with farmers to help them access sales opportunities while simultaneously working to increase your community's access to their products. What are some of the top challenges that the farmers in your networks deal with when trying to sell their goods to their own community? And just take a second to think about like what really comes up to mind in terms of main challenges for the farmers involved. Right. Yeah, I got some coming in here. So, cold storage, lack of refrigeration, cold chain. It's amazing how these things come up for all of us. Controlling price and getting a good price for their food. Time to do the marketing, staffing, transportation, pricing. Yeah, I think Caroline was just talking about the refrigeration challenges of getting the farm stop set up in New Orleans. So we'll hear more about that in a minute. Location, also just bringing product to market and leaving with half of it not sold. That's right. So not being able to move everything that you do bring to the farmer's market. All right. Well, thank you. Hopefully this kind of gets us thinking about why a farm stop might be a strategy and one of many solutions that we can try in our own communities. So with that, I am going to pass the mic over to Katie Barr. Katie, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us what this is all about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Susan. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for spending some time with us this Wednesday afternoon. I hope everyone's doing well and enjoying their day. My name is Kathryn Barr. Most folks call me Katie. No one calls me Kathryn unless they're mad at me usually. I have been studying a particular kind of local food distribution model called a farm stop for the past 5 years now. I started on this journey back when I was getting my master's degree at the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. Um, I have written a book, How to Start a Farm Stop, basically detailing exactly what the store is, how it operates, and I will go through all of that in the presentation that I'm offering to you today, which is essentially just, how we can make the most of our local supply chains and how we can best support our local growers. I currently work for a firm called Supply Change, which is a value chain coordination firm dedicated to enhancing access to institutional markets for underserved growers. And prior to that, I was at the Common Market, which, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit regional food hub that connects networks of growers directly to institutions as well. So I wear a couple of different hats in the food system space, both as a researcher, as a consultant, as someone who cares very deeply about connecting these gaps that everyone is so beautifully highlighting in the chat here for our food system. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get this party started talking about farm stops. Can everyone see that? Okay, let me try to go into presenter mode. Okay. Oh, great. I still see your faces. Okay. Alrighty. So what exactly is the farm stop model? And let's see if oh, perfect. So what I'm going to cover today is I'll give you a broad overview and a definition of the model itself. I'm going to talk a little bit about the added diversified revenue streams that are often required to support this model, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why. These stores, as a spoiler alert, they sell on consignment. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and what that means. I'll tell you a little bit more about what the current farm stop landscape looks like, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how the model is growing and has grown over the past few years. And of course, we'll leave some time for questions. So I think I've built up enough suspense here about what is a farm stop. Um, there we go. So the way that I like to define these stores is that they are year-round brick and mortar markets that are working primarily with local growers and farmers and operate on consignment. So that means that for every sale that's made through a farm stop, 70 to 80% of that sale goes right back to the farmer. And many of you in this room may know, or probably do know, that a typical retail transaction for a farmer is 16 cents on the dollar, if that. So what this represents is far more money going to the hands of local producers, and then that small commission, that small percentage being held to support the operations of the farm stop itself. So ultimately, what this helps to do is and I saw some comments in the chat on this, that farmers don't necessarily have the upper hand in a lot of retail markets. So this helps to give producers a much stronger representation for the true cost and value of producing their products. It also gives them more flexibility with their time, since often this has been described as kind of a combination between a retail grocery store and a farmer's market, but the farmer doesn't necessarily have to participate at the farmer's market. So there's no, 7 to 8 hours worth of selling directly to folks, loading up a truck, hiring additional staff, putting together your marketing, your signage. The farm stop takes care of all of that instead. So it gives them more flexibility and time. And then ultimately, it also helps to enhance community connections, which is what my research at Michigan focused on. So I want to offer a deeper dive into this definition and highlight a couple of key features about what makes a farm stop. So because it's very often described as, the term farm stop is often confused with farm stand. And because the aspects of this model are very similar to a farmer's market, there's sometimes some confusion about what exactly this is and how it operates. So these are retail locations. They are brick and mortar stores that have a cash register where folks can, ring up their goods. There's a big old produce deck usually when you walk in the door. There's, a grocery section, there's dairy, there's meat. And folks can usually walk through, get what they need, and then check out at the cashier line. So they're, like I said, year round, available as a walk-in grocery store. The direct-to-consumer sales through consignment is another incredibly important defining feature. Like I said, the purpose of these stores is to support the local growers that they're working with and enhance that local food economy, as it also mentions here, as these mission-directed stores. So that consignment piece is a lot of what helps them to do that. Giving the farmers 70 to 80% of each sale means that the store does not own the product itself. So there is a bit of inherent risk for the farmers in agreeing to work with a farm stop, since it's not necessarily guaranteed that their product will sell, but it's the same agreement that you would have as at a farmer's market as well. But the farm stop is taking over a lot of the marketing, the sales, and advertising, and the handling of that product for the farmer on their behalf. And in that way, these farm stops also act as advocates for the growers that they're working with. They do the best that they can to represent that farmer's or that producer's best needs. So that consignment piece is incredibly important to support their missions, which is another thing that makes these stores unique and applicable in our space. So they're incredibly mission directed. Their main directive is to grow the local food economy by supporting their local growers, as I just mentioned. And one of the other things that I love about this model is that it has an incredibly flexible business model. So operating on consignment doesn't necessarily preclude them or prevent them from incorporating as any particular kind of entity that they want. They can incorporate as a cooperative, as Jessica will talk about from Local Roots in Worcester, Ohio. They can be a nonprofit, which here I've given you an example. There's the Wild Ramp in Huntington, West Virginia. Or they could be an L3C, which for those of you who don't know is a low profit limited liability corporation. It's kind of like a B Corp, but oriented more towards the LLC side of things. So they're essentially a mission directed LLC. So a farm stop can incorporate as any one of these, depending on your community's needs and what kind of funding streams and tax structures you want to have access to or work with. So to offer a brief comparison, like I said, there's often some confusion here of, how does it shape up to a regular grocery store and how does it also compare to a farmer's market? I actually want to give credit here to Jessica, who created this chart and the backbone for this presentation. I don't want to take all the credit. And thank you, Jessica, for putting this together. It's been incredibly useful. So in terms of the hours of operation, a grocery store, as we know, is going to be your year-round, typically 8 to sometimes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A farm stop is very similar to that. They're, like I said, year round. They're open for a minimum of 8 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. They're, indoor facilities, whereas the farmer's market, as most of us probably know, is hyper seasonal, a couple days a week, usually just for a few hours, mostly outdoors unless there's a permanent structure or unless they go indoors during the winter. In terms of the licensing that's required, again, a farm stop is very similar to a grocery store. They are responsible for all of the health department codes and licensing within your particular state in the same way that a grocery store is. Unlike a farmer's market where there's typically, your farmer's market registration, or, the farm is responsible for whatever licensing they need to sell whichever products they're selling. In terms of the products that are available, again, very similar to a farmer's market here. So a farm stop is going to carry a lot of what we see at a farmer's market, only it'll have the opportunity for farmers to extend their seasons as well. So you will find, your produce, your baked goods, honey, There will sometimes be flowers, sometimes crafts, but meat, dairy, there's added refrigeration capacity for farm stops, as Caroline can probably talk to a little bit more clearly as well. As opposed to a typical grocery store, which is going to be, strawberries in January, which folks probably don't really want to experiment with. In terms of payment methods, I probably should update this just a little bit. A grocery store is similar to a farm stop in that, they have cash credit. They do accept SNAP and EBT. Farmers market is preferably cash for most of those growers. I know a lot of growers don't want to deal with the credit card processing fees, although I have seen that in recent years, more and more farmers are accepting credit card purchases. Of course, there's tokens as well. But a farm stop is going to be more aligned with the grocery store in that it offers a wide range of those payment methods. In terms of inventory, again, major difference here. The grocery store is going to buy and resell that product, whereas a farm stop is going to sell their product on consignment. That means that they do not own those goods until they are sold. And often a farm stop doesn't necessarily use an inventory system. And Jessica can probably talk a little bit more about that. But at a farmer's market, farmers have their own inventory, they're selling their own product direct. And then with staffing, again, farm stops and a grocery store are a little bit more aligned. There's going to be, paid staff ideally. Sometimes they can manage with volunteers, although I will encourage folks, if you're interested in starting a farm stop, to try to use paid staff or to work with paid staff instead and to give folks an honest salary. Volunteers are fantastic, they're wonderful, but sometimes more structure is needed because this model has a much different payment structure and operational flow to it.
Hey,
I hope
Katie,
that
before
helps you.
you move on, there's a question in the chat if you could maybe define how a farm stop is different from a food hub.
That's a great question. So food hubs, in my experience, and I know that there's a number of different kinds of food hubs that operate and exist out there, operate at a little bit of a larger scale. This is similar to a food hub in that they are aggregating product directly and selling it out to consumers. Some food hubs do operate in that capacity, but a farm stop often, and again, in my experience, and there's many different definitions of a food hub, can offer a step further by providing out more of that diversified revenue stream that I'm going to talk about. So they offer cafes, they offer CSA boxes, they offer educational events and classes, community events, they have online stores as well. One of the main differences that I'm a long-winded talker, forgive me, essentially getting to here is that it seems that food hubs operate at a much larger scale and have the capacity to deliver to community organizations, to institutions. They often have more logistics and delivery capacity and capability on their own, whereas a farm stop is much more of a centralized location. They can have some delivery operations available, as some of them did switch to that during COVID, but it's typically going to be focused primarily on the storefront itself. And the other thing I'll mention about the difference between a food hub and a farm stop is that a food hub will typically work on their markup as a customer-facing markup. So, having had the opportunity to work for a food hub myself, there's a 30 to 40% markup that the food hub will put to be able to manage their operations. So that gets projected onto the consumer. In this case, there's no markup. The farm stop is just giving that 70 to 80% of the retail price directly to the grower, and the customer doesn't receive an increase in what that price would be to help compensate for that. So in short, the shift in that markup and the overall capacity and volume of their ability. I hope that that answers that for now. And that's a good question to ask because there's a lot of similarities between the two. So I wanted to just offer a quick visual of different farm stops around the country and what they look like. And as you can tell, they are pretty much what you would expect a typical retail operation to look like. You got your grocery section, your produce deck, there's potted plants available, there's some craft sections available, there's dairy and meat fridges. So looks like a typical retail operation. And feel free to stop me if there's any other questions. I can't see the chat, so let me know. So selling on consignment, this is often folks do get stuck on this piece a little bit because the idea of consignment typically falls to clothing or furniture, right? We've really seen the idea of consignment more in those spaces, but when we're condensing it down into food, and again, not adding that customer-facing markup, there's a couple of different ways that you could make this work. So again, Jessica put this together, so thank you for that. Ultimately, the store is going to set the ground rules. So they will determine exactly what it is that they want to sell, what kinds of growers that they want to work with, and who would be available to sell into their operations. So often they will have like a sign up form, or they'll have direct conversations with their growers on what they would like to see. The important thing about a farm stop too is that they have the capacity to develop really strong and collaborative, communicative relationships with their growers. Because again, there's that heightened risk into selling into this kind of a market. So the store will set those rules, figure out exactly what they want to sell with who, and ultimately ensuring a bit of variety and stability for customers. We don't want to see, 10 heirloom tomato growers all selling at the same time. They want to be able to offer as much variety as they can to their community. Then the farm, the producer, once they agree to those terms and work directly with the farm stop, they will bring their produce to the store. In some cases, as I've seen in certain places like in Arkansas, the farm stop will go out to purchase it, but it's more often the producer will drop off their goods, and then the store will retain those goods and set them up for display. And remember here that the farmer is setting their own price and that there's no additional markup for selling that product back to the community. So like I said, the store will be responsible for any licensing, regulations, and representing the producer and their goods. So that also includes making sure that their display looks beautiful and full, that there's information about the farms present, and then ultimately they're responsible for the transaction and then paying their growers. And then lastly, the store pays their growers. They decide on a specific payment schedule that the farmer, of course, will agree to, and then they take that small commission for their own operations. So I know I've mentioned this a couple of times. Because farm stops operate on consignment, no store would be able to make it on just that 20 to 30% margin. That would be insane. So what they do is, as I mentioned, they build out additional revenue streams to enhance the overall sustainability of the model itself. And that could be any of the ones that I had previously mentioned, excuse me. That could be a cafe, it could be a tavern selling beer and wine. It could be community events, produce box subscriptions. Some farm stops have commercial kitchens or incubator kitchens to support other local partnerships. They also have incubator spaces. In the top left corner, that's at Random Harvest in Prairieville, New York. That's actually a community space that they rent out for folks who want, catered meals, or who have artistic endeavors or classes that they want to teach. So they rent out that space. And there's really a lot of creativity in how farm stops have been able to build out these mechanisms to support their bottom line. The important thing here is to make sure that it doesn't exhaust your resources. So this is kind of what I like to say the fun part, where you get to work with your community directly to understand what would fit best for your community's needs and what would also help your store. And the interesting thing here too, not to muddy the works, is with a cafe or a tavern, a lot of farm stops will operate those particular relationships on wholesale as wholesale relationships instead of doing that on consignment. So that also helps to add a little bit more stability to the revenue streams as well. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about what the current farm stop landscape looks like. So, because this is a new model, we're doing the best that we can right now to try to document where these stores exist and how many of them currently exist. I'll talk a little bit in a couple slides about the efforts that I'm putting together to essentially research where these stores are and how they're operating. But right now, at least, we know of 20 stores in 12 states that are operating according to the parameters that I previously provided. So they're working directly with local growers. They are a brick and mortar location. Most are operating on consignment or some level of consignment. And a couple of years ago, when I first started doing my research in 2021, 2022, there were only, I think, 8 stores that we knew of. So within that time, that was a huge jump, seeing that there's 20 stores that we know of, with many more likely operating that we don't necessarily know of yet, that have not been included on this map. And if anyone in this group is operating what you feel like aligns with a farm stop, please feel free to contact me. We would love to represent your operations here as well. But this is essentially just to show you that the model has grown. And I do want to talk a little bit about some of the research that I've done in the past to help spread the word about the model. And also, for those of you who are not familiar, Argus Farm Stop in Ann Arbor, Michigan is kind of one of the OGs in the space. They're one of the most successful farm stops. They have 3 locations in Ann Arbor, and they offer technical trainings and consulting services for those who are interested in learning more about the model. So they actually have a free monthly webinar next Tuesday, I believe, at 1 p.m. Eastern. So if anyone is interested in doing a deeper dive into this model and understanding how they did it within their own community, it's a really great opportunity to learn. And I think it's only 60 minutes. But what I have been doing on the side to try to promote this model is learning as much as we can about how it operates within the communities that it's serving. So I did publish my master's research this year in the Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems, and Community Development, where I worked with 6 farm stops around the country to understand the impact that they're having on their communities. So, whether consumers felt that the store was supporting their neighborhood's resiliency, whether it helped them feel like they were participating in and contributing to a local food economy. And it was really interesting seeing the results of that, that for the most part, they do have a very supportive and important role within the communities that they're serving. Of course, this was a very small study, and more studies are needed to better solidify that finding and understand more about how they're operating. But it was at least a baseline and a start to hopefully encourage others to take an interest in and how communities are interacting with these kind of stores. And then lastly, I did mention that I worked very closely with the folks at Argus Farm Stop. I pestered them for an entire year to understand exactly how they got started, what their mechanisms are, their operations. And I condensed all of that information into my book, How to Start a Farm Stop, which you can download for free using that QR code. For those of you who want to learn a little bit more about the nitty-gritty operational details, about financing and fundraising, and all of the fun stuff that goes into creating an entity like this. I do also want to highlight that farm stops have been in the news in the past year or so. If anyone missed it this year, the Argus Farm Stop in Ann Arbor was actually featured in the New York Times. I think it was a front page article, which was incredibly exciting. But we've also received press from Civil Eats, Food and Wine, Modern Farmer. The folks at Argus have participated in a number of podcast interviews. They've been on TV. So we're doing the most that we can to try to educate others about how this model could potentially serve the needs of other communities if it feels like a good fit. And then lastly, we do have a conference that we've put on for the past 2 years. This will be the 3rd year that we're putting it on. Essentially, we are gathering around 300 people together in Ann Arbor, Michigan, February 12th to the 15th in 2026, to talk about this model, to talk about local food systems development, and to really gain your perspectives on how this model can support your community. So we would love to see you there. We're going to have a great lineup of speakers. And if you want any additional information about the event itself, please feel free to reach out. We'll have the registration and the speakers available up on the website soon. But on that website with that QR code that you can link to, there's also a whole page where you can learn additional information about farm stops. We have a full list of the farms that I listed on that map available, so you can click on their websites and see what their businesses look like, or potentially reach out to them if you have additional questions. The last thing that I'll mention is that because there is so much growth around this model, I'm in the process of trying to develop a national network to represent these stores and to offer a handful of things. The first is networking. So we all know how successful the Food Systems Leadership Network has been in bringing people together to share best practices, communicate, about challenges, and receive support from people, like-minded folks who are in the same boat or interested in learning more. Networking and communicating is honestly one of the most important things that we can do. So within this network, I'm aiming to have a strong support system for those who are operating farm stops, looking to operate one, or even to just learn about them. I'm also trying to gather resources right now in terms of, case studies of where farm stops are doing really well and also where they potentially failed. replicable templates for those who are starting a business, so folks don't have to recreate the wheel every single time. Funding directories to help folks connect with the right people, to help them write grants if that's the direction that they want to go in, and much more. And in terms of research, I mentioned earlier that I am currently trying to understand farm stops around the country. So I'm putting together a farm stop census to understand where these stores are doing really well, where they're not, and where they need additional support, ultimately to be able to one, make the case for the model itself, to learn about the community impact these stores are having, both for the farmers and the communities that they're serving, and then also to be able to tailor these kind of resources to best support their needs. So that brings me to my last point here of offering technical support. So the folks at Argus Farm Stop are doing an incredible job at offering a level of technical support and consulting for those who are serious about wanting to start a farm stop. But there's also a whole handful of folks who, you know, are at the very beginning stages of that journey. They don't necessarily understand their community's needs, but want to know where this kind of entity could fit in. They don't necessarily know what kind of resources that they would need, what sort of funding or business development. So the network will serve as an opportunity to provide technical assistance in those initial planning phases. But I'll also be offering educational opportunities through communities of practice like this. We have one coming up next Tuesday as well at 4 p.m. And for those of you who do want to be a part of the network, who want to learn more and stay in the know, I've included another QR code there for a Slack channel that I've put together. And I can share the link for that in the chat as well after we're done with the conversation. If you want to stay in touch with me or any other farm stops in that space, or anyone who is interested in the model. So would love to see you there. And that's essentially everything that I have for you today. I hope that that offers at least a high-level overview of what farm stops are, how they're operating. I'm sure you all have plenty of questions, so I'd love to take as many of those as we can. Thank you all so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Katie. That was really clear and comprehensive, and I feel like I have an understanding of what this is. And of course, unsurprisingly, there are some fantastic questions in the chat. So
Absolutely.
what I'm going to suggest we do, because I know we really want to hear from the practitioners too, who are here, who are in either running one or starting one. So I'm going to try to pull a couple of these together. There's a couple of questions about pricing.
Hmm.
And so I'll just kind of throw a couple of these out there. Carly was saying, wouldn't producers have to increase their prices in a similar markup model to make what they'd make at a farmer's market, to make up for that difference
Not
with the
necessarily.
consignment?
Not
Mhm.
necessarily. So I understand that it's similar to it's easy to think about this similar to a grocery store or a food hub as we were just talking about, but there's no markup associated with a farm stop. So a farmer can set their own prices as to how they think it's fair to sell their products. They can come in with farmers market prices if that's what they've been successful with. And often what ends up happening is a farm stop can coordinate with a farmer's market, and the growers who are not able to sell the rest of their goods at a farmer's market can then take those products directly to a farm stop so that they reduce their overall waste. If a farmer comes into a farm stop and, let's say, tries to undercut a bunch of producers or sell their product for way more than they potentially should so that it won't sell, the farm stop can work directly with that producer in a very close and collaborative relationship to talk to them about their pricing and what would be best for selling their goods. So the farm step is also an advocate for them to help them set prices in a way that is fair for them if they need that support. I hope that answers that.
I think so. But also, Carly and Ben and others that had questions around this. I mean, it was Ben's question was, how does consignment differ from directly purchasing from farmers? Like,
Yeah,
versus through a distributor. Um, just
through a
naming that,
distributor or through farms.
grocery, what do they say? Grocery cost of goods sold is typically 70 to 90%, which would represent the same share of sales for the farmer as the consignment model if the retailer purchases directly from the farmer. So I think they're trying to tease out what's the difference here for the producer. And that relates back to Carly's question of just like, how do you explain how this could benefit farmers, especially if they already have a strong direct to consumer system already?
Right. So the interesting thing about a farm stop is that it's not meant to be a primary source of income. And I did interview about 40 farmers who worked with a handful of different farm stops to understand how this benefited their operations, if it did at all. And essentially what they said was it's not going to be their primary source of income. It's an added revenue stream for them for when a farmer's market falls short, or to give them a little bit of extra support throughout the year to extend their season, or to add additional crops into their rotation, or to add additional livestock to their operations. So what it ends up doing is creating stronger and more direct relationships with the community itself. A farm stop, again, takes away the time and the effort needed to prepare for other direct to consumer outlets like a farmer's market. It also helps them with their marketing. Farm stop can help, again, set those prices. It basically serves as just an added support system. And a farm stop is intended to work in alignment with and in association with whatever other revenue streams a farm or a farmer is
Hmm.
working with. So it's just a yes and.
Yeah.
And for a store that is willing to take on a lot of the, separate kind of marketing aspects, the business development and support for a farmer, they don't necessarily have to think about that then. They can continue to go back doing what they love. And some of the farmers that I spoke with, a handful of them were able to manage that season extension. They were able to add additional crops to their rotation. They were able to pay off a portion of their full mortgage from the added revenue that they received from working with a farm stop.
I think this is somewhat related to Mark's question, just asking if farm stops compete with farmers markets where they have a strong presence. So where maybe places are co-located or there's, strong farmers market and a farm stop in the same community. What's the dynamic between those?
Absolutely. And like I said, farm stops are meant to be in collaboration with these um, other food distribution mechanisms. So they want to work with a local farmers market. The farm stop is not trying to be the be all end all for a farmer. They're just, again, like I said, an added revenue stream for those farmers to take advantage of if they want to. But if it doesn't suit their needs, then of course they can opt out of it. There are many situations where a farmers market and a farm stop are operating right next to each other. The Wild Ramp in Huntington, West Virginia, they collaborate directly with their farmers market. So again, if farmers have excess at the end of a market that they weren't able to sell, they can then bring that into a farm stop and they'll take care of the rest of that for them. So it's more of a guarantee that that product will sell. They'll still make more than they had initially thought they would. Or I know in Missouri, a farm stop just opened alongside with a farmers market association. They're using their offices or their office space to help with administrative costs. So, and again, building on that relationship of providing farmers with another outlet. I think a lot of folks see this as a kind of a competitive space, but really it's meant to just be in collaboration with. It's an extension of a farmers market. And the other benefit is that these stores are year round. So when that farmers market goes away, if a farmer relies on that farmers market as their primary source of income, those, depending on where you live and depending on the seasons there, those, handful of months that that farmer doesn't necessarily have as much of an income as they otherwise would have if the farmers market were there, they can then default to the farm stop. There are plenty of farmers that will work directly with a farm stop in the off season in their like quieter months if they have that capacity for season extension. Let's say they have fruit crops or they have microgreens or they have some added level of extension for their products. They'll provide those directly to the farm stop in the winter and then go back to supporting and working with the farmers market as their primary source of income when it returns in the spring or whenever it does for wherever you guys exist. So there's lots of opportunities for them to coexist and collaborate together to add to the value that a farmer can get.
Oh, so many good questions here. I think this is related to what you were just talking about. Is Adam was asking, are there more challenges in cold climates where the growing season is shorter for farm stops to be able to keep inventory, or would they just transition into kind of more of a standard grocery store in the off season for growing? So maybe more value added products and other kinds of, non-veg products. And then Daniel was adding on to that. Are there any farm stops that are doing in-house processing for those off-season sales? So, doing value-added production, IQF, dehydrating, canning, et cetera.
Those are great questions. So yes, for those in the colder seasons, There's a couple different options to be able to fill up your shelves. And one of the things that farm stops do really well is to maintain the illusion of abundance as well. As a farm stop, as a retail operation, you want to draw folks into that produce stack as much as possible. And you want to make, you want to give folks the perspective that there's a lot available, even if there isn't as much variety. So even if there isn't as much available, within your particular season at the time, you can still make the most of what is available with your growers. Let's say there's root vegetables, there's apples, potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, garlic. You can still make that look fairly abundant. I also recognize that folks do want a bit more variety during those seasons. So there's a couple different ways that farm stops can manage that. Like I said, some farm stops do rely on additional wholesale relationships during those seasonal months to add in other items that may not necessarily be 100% local or seasonal, just to kind of bridge that gap. A lot of farm stops do have commercial kitchens or partnerships with commercial kitchens or incubator spaces where they will rely on those value added products. A lot of farm stops will also create relationships with other local businesses in the community that maybe have crafts or gifts, and they'll build out that portion of their store a little bit bigger so that folks can shop a different segment or a different variety of things. But in terms of the produce itself, they can either extend or, create that illusion of abundance, work with their growers to use what's available. They can rely on those wholesale relationships. They can build out relationships with other local businesses that produce value-added products if they don't have their own commercial kitchen. And then lastly, they can also work with their growers, depending on how successful the store is, whatever kind of added value the farm stop is bringing to their growers. Some growers will decide to do a little bit more season extension into the winter to provide additional variety for the farm stop. I know one farmer who actually flipped his entire operation. He created a whole set of hoop houses to grow hothouse tomatoes and cucumbers in the winter. That he would then sell to the farm stop in the winter so he wouldn't have any competition. So there's lots of different ways that a farm stop can work directly with their growers because of that direct relationship that they build with them. At its core, a farm stop is really about building that trust and that relationship with the grower to understand what's best for them and to, provide for their community. Hope that helps.
Yeah, right on. Well, I know there's a couple of other questions that we didn't quite get to, but we can come back around to these as we continue the conversation. I really want to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from Caroline and Jessica. So, Katie, I think you were going to lead kind of somewhat of a panel conversation now.
Yes. So we were curious about understanding for you guys. Well, I'd love to hear from you both first about your experiences. I want to give you both space for that. But what I really wanted to understand from you both is, one piece of advice that you'd be willing to share with folks who are interested in this model for their own communities. So I might actually give them some space to present first and then provide time for that question afterwards, unless you guys want to dive into that first.
Well, I can go first. And just before I answer your question, I'll say I just think this is so lovely when I see Katie present this and it looks so put together and the model has really matured over time. I was part of Local Roots Market and Cafe in Worcester. I was part of the group that helped to bring that to fruition back in 2008, 2009. So it's been a long time. Local Roots, the model that we developed, grew into become what is now known as a farm stop. At the time, we did a lot of explaining of, well, what is this? Well, we're kind of a grocery store, we're kind of a farmer's market, but we're indoor in the year round, and the farmers don't have to be on site. And so that's what we were telling people. And the model really came from, we're right out here in rural farm country, Ohio. And local food was really a big thing. And here I was, solidly middle class with money to spend and driving by farm fields all the time with no way to access other than a Saturday morning farmers market that operated 5 months out of the year for 4 hours on a Saturday. And you had to bring cash. And that just seemed like that. How was local food ever going to grow if that was the only way that we were expecting customers to go so far out of their way to be able to reach the farmers? So that is primarily where the idea of a farm stop came from. We wanted it to be easy on the farmer to sell, and we wanted it to be easy on the buyer to buy. Everything else that came from it, I like to say, or what we always said was innovation, or necessity is the mother of innovation, came because we had to try to make this dream come true for a market that sold local food, a cafe that sold healthy, ready-to-eat food made from local products, and a commercial kitchen that then I saw some of the things in the chat, did some of the processing and preserving and allowed small businesses to grow from it. And so that was what we ultimately envisioned Local Roots to be. But we had nothing. And our model really was, how can we make this happen with nothing? So the first thing we did is we looked at what our top costs would be, which were rent, staff, and inventory. We found a building that was vacant, that was owned by the county, and pitched the idea to them saying, hey, if you could help us get this off the ground, we could help the community. And that a lot of, the funding was going to help be spread around. We were going to help the farms. This wasn't any one person making money off of this. As far as inventory, that's where consignment came from, was we basically did not have money to pay up front. And so we would sell the product and then pay in arrears. So that's how we were able to then cash flow the operation. And staffing was working with volunteers because, again, we didn't have money to pay staff at first. And the whole idea, Katie had mentioned, we were a co-op, and that was basically back, you're thinking this is 2009. This was a crowdfunding mechanism, before that was really out there. So we had $50 annual memberships. We had $1,000 lifetime memberships. We took member loans, and we allowed people to donate their time in lieu of money, because we really looked at this of how do we leverage our community assets to bring this thing to life. And that was where the co-op really came from with that. And so it was really just a low risk operation. We tied in our best advertisers were our farmers at the farmers market. We tied in with the closing of the farmers market to the opening of the indoor market. So they were handing out flyers, throughout the market saying, okay, well, when the market closes, come meet us at Local Roots. And we opened the market part first. We operated for a while, closed, renovated, reopened with our full retail food establishment license. And then over time, through grants, we then added in the cafe kitchen, and then commercial processing kitchen was how we did it. So it was a slow build up to what you see today, and it looks so beautiful when Katie shows the slides that it was like it was all thought out, but we really were coming up as we go. So I think that going back to your question, then what would be the advice is really, it doesn't have to happen overnight. Really think about what your community assets are, what's available to you, and what you want to see. And there's no one right way to do it, but it's just important to keep doing something. And we worked a lot with the mission, having that mission in mind to support farmers and support the food system, and then let things grow and figure it out as you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. Really appreciate you being here. Caroline, do you want to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about your project as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Caroline. I come from, my day job is real estate design and construction. We also have a small family farm in Poplarville, Mississippi. I live in New Orleans, Louisiana. And we came to the farm stop model basically out of need as a farmer. We raise beef and pork, and we have a 7-acre crop of blueberries in the spring. And we were, we've slowly built our beef and pork program over the years. And we started by selling directly to consumers, but it was only whole animals or half animals. And as more people wanted, we got more interest in it. But it's not very accessible for everyone to buy in those quantities. Having freezer space and having, the money up front to make that large purchase is not always accessible. So trying to sell individualized cuts of meat directly to consumers without a storefront was so hard and challenging. And we applied to our local farmers market in New Orleans, and at the time we applied, we were not able to get in because they had too many meat vendors already, and they weren't at a spot where they wanted to add another competing vendor. So we were just, my husband and I were always saying, like, God, I wish someone would just take this product and sell it and pay us a percentage of it later. Like, that's what mattered the most to us, was getting our product out of our freezer and off of our farm, because it's just going to go bad. And he was doing a lot of research, and he found Argus online, and he was like, you've got to look at the store. They have an amazing, concept of, it's an entire storefront where farmers just bring their stuff and they sell it, and then they pay them for it once it sells. And I was like, let's do that. That sounds perfect. And he was just really encouraged me to learn more about it. I did the Argus webinar back in the spring, and it was very eye-opening. And to go off of what Jessica said on advice is just time, and like to hear your story of how it happened, so it evolved organically and slowly. Imagine now kind of looking at what farm stops have become, really giving yourself the time to execute all of the things that need to happen at once, which is often construction of the building, financing, farm and vendor outreach, and then setting up this entire retail platform. And yeah, are there any specific questions people might have about what it's like? I'm also here today still learning, because it has been a huge learning process, trying to put together all of the pieces.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Really appreciate the work and the effort that you're putting into developing that. I know it's incredibly difficult, and I know there's so many moving pieces there. And I think it's so valuable. Yeah, and I think it's so valuable coming to that with a farmer's perspective as well. And I'm not sure if you fully answered or were thinking about this, but do you have any advice for those who may be curious about this or want to incorporate more of this kind of model into their own community? As you're going through this process, what's something that you would recommend folks would really think critically about?
Well, I've been thinking very critically about what most people have been asking today, and the biggest thing that I get met with as I reach out to farms is generally always very excited, but why the consignment model, and why is that beneficial? And I think what most people's initial reaction or question to it is, why should a farm take all of the risk in this scenario? And really understanding and reframing the way I think about that too is like, we are here to share in that risk, and we're not trying to unassociate from the risk. And it's really focusing on what we are doing for the farms, and like what we are able to provide, which is the 7 days a week. Storefront, staffing and overhead, marketing, branding, or not branding, but marketing of their brand, online website, social media, and then really facilitating that direct relationship. So thinking about that, and then just knowing that you have a local demand for it. And that's what felt so strong for us, is so many people here in New Orleans want access to local food, and not everyone, we don't have anything like a store dedicated to local food here. We have a great farmers market system that pops up about 3 times a week in different areas, but even such a small amount of people are able to make it to that. There's a much bigger demand. So knowing that your area has that demand and can support this.
Absolutely. The other thing I was going to say, as far as the consignment model, was something we put in place, and Katie, you can correct me, I think a lot of the other farm stops do this, is we do a tiered system. So produce being the highest risk, the most highly perishable, paid the lowest commission, where something on the far end, like arts and crafts that are, totally stable and maybe just there to supplement, paid the highest commission. So we were able to spread that risk around and say, hey, farmer, bringing us lettuce. We know you're taking a risk bringing it here. So you're getting then supplemented by the other parts of the store.
That makes sense. I have a question for you, if I could.
Yeah.
You
Sure.
draw a hard line with consignment. Do you implement any wholesale in your model?
So early on, we were consignment only. And then over time, we opened it up to start to bring in different things that couldn't be grown locally. And that's expanded even more. We were really, really hell bent to start off on local only. And that has evolved over time. From 2009 to what you see in the market now, they now do a much more sustainability focused. So local, the smallest, closest, most local when possible, but also reaching out to the larger global network of sustainably grown, supporting small farms in their region. So it's evolved over time, but again, still, it's like when tomatoes are in season in Ohio, there's going to be local tomatoes. There's going to be lettuce from the small, close farm. But in the winter, then that will be supplemented for some of the greenhouse growers in the area who are larger, but have a higher reach. And I saw this in the chat. I'll throw this in. Our first winter, because we opened in November in Ohio. So everybody was saying, well, what are you going to have? Well, there was still so much when the farmer's market closed. You had your broccolis and cauliflowers. We were going into Thanksgiving. We had Brussels sprouts. We had all of those things. And then we have farms that did containers for storing apples over the winter. So we had all of that in our first year. By the second year, the farms were coming to me saying, do you promise you're going to be open? Because if you are, I'll plant more. And when we said, we promise we'll be open, and they planted more. By the third year, we had people applying for hoop houses and high tunnels. So that now they were looking at this as a possibility for season extension. So we knew that that was helping to grow the local economy and helping to support the farms.
Yeah, that's really beautiful evidence of the growth of that system. And that's a lot to be proud of as well. There were a couple of other questions in the chat for you guys. Carly asked, how do you afford freezers and fridges up front? That's probably a question for you, Jessica.
Yeah. Well, we found a great dealer that worked with used products. And so we were able to find used products that came with a warranty on them, and that I'm sure there's other places in the area. But mainly what we did is we applied for some grant funding that helped us to buy things like our point of sale system, some initial freezers and refrigerators, some of the equipment that we needed. We always tried to look at, and that was very early on that we applied for that. We always tried to look at grants to say, how can this enhance and grow and not for operating costs? This was also something that we relied a lot on our members for. So our members could, for instance, we had the commercial kitchen. One of the ladies who was using the commercial kitchen paid for her commercial kitchen by buying the stove that was in there that then everybody could use. So we used a lot of that like community capital collaboration to get things going where we could.
That's amazing. And Caroline, I don't know if you've gotten to that point yet where you have purchased or are ready to purchase, but do you have any thoughts as you're on your own journey?
Yeah, we're just circling the drain right now, refrigeration.
Circle up, you're circling up.
It's kind of what it's been, has us on hold right now because we have gone the route of personally financing this operation. And so we have, we set our budgets in the beginning, and those are the loans we applied for. And now we are trying to make sure it all works within that budget. And refrigeration is just astronomical, and you need so much of it, but it's so important because that is what is most important to the farms. And so the backstock refrigeration that we're trying to have on site are these 8 by 20 foot shipping containers turned into freezers, one refrigeration, one freezer. And that's been a huge selling point to our farmers, is that they have storage, that they can bring in a lot of product and they're not having to come in every other day. And but it's the most expensive part. And then being in New Orleans, like, we have to ensure that when our power goes out almost every other week, especially during hurricane season, that their product is safe. So then needing generators for all of this equipment, and then all of the merchandising equipment that goes in the store. So we have been exploring every avenue right now, looking at used products versus new products, and single phase versus 3-phase, and there's a lot of options, and it's hard. It's the hardest choice to make when you haven't operated a farm stop yet.
Yeah.
And know exactly what you need, and kind of wanting to do it all so great out right out the door. Like, I have my dream list of refrigeration, but knowing that it may have to, be something that you build upon over time.
Yeah. And from what Jessica said, a lot of this is very much a stepwise process of, figuring out what works, what doesn't work. I always like to encourage folks who are in this space as well, and Jessica has said this many times, don't be afraid to fail fast. And so you can figure out what does work, what doesn't, and get to that point of stability. And I also will put another quick plug in for the conference. For those who are interested in joining us this year, we will have a whole section and a whole session on refrigeration, because we recognize and know that that's a very, for lack of a better phrase, hot topic, pun intended, that, folks really need to know how to be able to access those options for themselves. So, and if folks can't make it, I can check to see if we are recording any of that, but I will also make any resources from that conversation available to those in the national group as well, because this is definitely something that I know is top of mind for a lot of folks. Another quick question for you, Jessica. Deborah asked, when you say you're located in rural Ohio, what are your demographics? Are you close to any urban center or only smaller communities?
We're lucky. We're about an hour from Cleveland, Columbus, Akron, Canton, Mansfield, but our center is very rural. The county only has about 100,000 people. The main town is 20,000. We're also very lucky. We have 2 colleges, or higher education in the area, so we've got a nice mix of folks. But we are by all means very rural out here.
And then likewise for you, Caroline, someone asked, in New Orleans, how did you go about picking a location?
Well, we originally had a different location, and then I did the Argus training and realized how big it could be, how successful, like how many people it may draw in, and how important location was. So we pivoted, and we found this different spot in the city. It's right on a bayou in our area, which is on a greenway bike path through the city. It's a highly trafficked area. So really assessing that and making sure that we were in a spot that is easy to access and has a lot of visibility already.
Yeah, I think that location piece is incredibly important. And also, yes, right next to a farmer's market.
And right next to our Thursday farmer's market.
Yeah. I always encourage folks to, for those who are curious about looking for a location, to kind of do a little analysis for yourself of, if you find a location, try to record how many people, kind of set up camp there for like an hour if you can, see how many people walk by, how many people drive by, if you have the accessibility and can do that as well. That's essentially what the folks at Argus did. Their first location was built on a abandoned gas station. And they basically camped out one day across the street in, I think, February. There was snow on the ground. I think there was a mattress in the parking lot. And they just had a ticker and they counted, how many people walked by, how many cars went by, just to see, like, is this an active zone? And also what kinds of folks were walking by. They noticed a lot of families, a lot of younger students heading to school at the university, folks who may be looking for something on the go, snack, or who may be looking to feed a family. So having that perspective of, who's in your community, who's around, if you have a location that you have an eye on is sometimes helpful.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other questions that maybe are just like, general about the farm stop model. And these might be good questions for you, Katie. John and some others were just kind of asking about some data. So specifically, do you have any data on the average purchase per visit? Number of unique customers per month, number of visits per customer, or like just getting a sense of scale here in terms of foot traffic. And I'm sure that there's a wide spectrum
Yeah.
and variety of this.
Very wide spectrum there. I can really only speak to the information that I know from Argus at the moment, and that's actually really good feedback for what I can include in the census that I'm putting together now.
Mm-hmm.
Getting a sense of the sales data of who's shopping and how. So one of the things that Argus does encourage folks, and this is also another useful tool for those who are in the process of developing a farm step or curious about figuring out your financials, you can do that kind of estimated exercise for yourself, where you can project how many folks you would like to come visit the store in a day, the average amount of money they would like to spend, both in your diversified stream. So let's say at a cafe versus in the store itself, and kind of build out your base financials from there of how long it'll take for you to become in the black stable. And what I know from the folks at Argus, I think they had initially, when they opened in 2014, estimated that the average purchase at the farm stop would be around $15. I think it's now at 26. And I think the cafe, I hope I don't get this wrong. And if I do, someone, I'll circle back and try to correct it. I think at the cafe, they initially projected $6 and now it's more like $8, but that could also depend on inflation and the additional economic factors. I don't have more information beyond that of kind of what the averages are around the country, but I don't know, Jessica, do you have a sense of what local roots sales were like when you were there?
When I was there, we were around $15 per person, and our goal, like our break even, was 10,000 a week. And so initially we were thinking, oh, we would have, 50, I can't, I'm gonna mess up the math, but so many people doing $50, and then really found that we had a lot more traffic, but at a lower price point. And sometimes people who came back multiple times in a week to, not doing like one big grocery shopping, but more coming every day to see what's happening today.
Yeah. And for a broader metric, a lot of farm stops try to measure out their overall impact for their local food community as a whole. So, for example, since opening in 2014, Argus Farm Stop has given $26 million back to farmers in the local food economy. So that's another, just kind of, that's a lot of money that they can work with. And I think the last that I heard, well, no, I don't want to get those numbers wrong. I'll leave it at that for now. But many of them also do try to estimate, in the time that they've been in operation and also in the span of a year, how much money they're giving back to their local growers. And that's part of what I'm also collecting for the census now, so that I'll have some real, metrics to be able to show you of, what the overall impact of these stores is.
Mm-hmm. One other question that I've seen in a little bit of a theme here is just wondering what people do with stuff that doesn't sell. So do you have systems in place for produce that's on its way out or expired? What is happening with that surplus or with stuff that isn't making it into customers' hands? Jessica, what
Jessica.
does that look like for y'all? Mm-hmm.
Well, and I will say I was with Local Roots for the first decade of their existence. I haven't been on the team for a couple years, but what we looked at it is, since we were selling on consignment, that product was ultimately the producer still. And so we would work with them and try to get a sense of what they wanted. Some people wanted to pick it up and take it home to their chickens. Some people took it home and made sauce. Some people said just get it to a good home. So we worked with we had a composting structure on site and volunteers that picked that up. We took stuff to the local shelters. And this was all before we had our commercial kitchen built. And so once our commercial kitchen was operating, now what Local Roots does is that they are actually processing that. They're making lunches for Boys and Girls Club. They're making applesauce out of apples. They're freezing stuff that's then going into the freezers for the off season, so that it's really coming full circle now that the processing kitchen is on site and they've got staff in there manning that.
Yeah, that seems like a really important component here. Caroline, how are y'all thinking about that as you're planning ahead? Oh, you're on mute.
The commercial kitchen is the dream plan. What I always reference is like our 5-year plan. If we're so successful that we can grow it, that's the dream, is to add the commercial kitchen in the back for the value add. I'm also looking to partner with a local recycling company his name's Ben. He specializes in composting. And then that was my main question for Argus when I started this. It was like, well, what do you do with the waste, and how much waste is there? And really, they express that there is really such minimal waste. And most of the waste comes from picking out produce that might not be good enough to sell. But they really turn it over very quickly. And so that's really encouraging to hear. And I really believe that we have the demand to support that, and that the majority, if not all, products that get delivered from farmers will get sold. That's the
And
goal.
Yeah.
farmers anticipate, especially produce, they know that there's going to be risk. Even at the farmers market, people are going to pick up and squeeze the tomatoes, and those, that there's going to be some loss on that. And they understand and accept that as part of doing business too.
Hmm.
But we always did say, and I'll throw this out there, like, let's say we had something like we had a freezer one time go down, or a refrigerator, froze all the products in it, and it was just a loss. And we did pay the farmers for that, because we felt that that was something that they had to trust the co-op. They had to trust that we were doing the best we could to take care of their product. And so we made them whole. Now, some of the farmers turned around and gave us the money back, which was really lovely of them. But at the same time, like, we felt that that was our responsibility, since it was something that went wrong on our end.
Caroline, I have a question for you. Just knowing that you're in this like really, formative developmental phase for the farm stop in New Orleans, and you're speaking to a group of people from across the country who have a lot of connections and resources, et cetera. What support do you need? Like, what kind of resources, information, connections are you needing right now that we can help crowdsource for you?
Um, Thanks for pointing that out. It is actually really intimidating speaking in front of so many people who this is already your life, and you've dedicated your life to this profession. And I feel like I'm just entering the scene. The biggest things that I just have no idea how the things work are definitely funding programs, and like what community incentives there might be, support for refrigeration. And like I do feel like this is such a community driven idea that I'm sure that there is more support in that sense. And then really putting together all the pieces of the governing agencies, of like who is tracking what we're doing and how we're doing it, and like what certificates and licenses are needed, what the farms need to provide, what messaging we need to provide, so that we can sell their product and not get in trouble. There's a lot of gray area there, and it seems like there's so many different people who are in charge of these things
Hmm.
that it's kind of hard to track down and understand. And that is the final leg that I haven't fully dove into that world yet. I've been trying to pull together, construction, farm outreach, and our operating systems. And the next phase I'm getting into is really the logistics of what we need across those fields.
Yeah, thank you for naming those things. And if, as folks, as you were listening to her sharing what she's looking for information, please send her some links and connections. Caroline, I definitely want to follow up with you because I know some folks in and around the city that could be good resources around some of the things that you just named, as well as some of the funding opportunities. So you and I should definitely follow up.
Yes, I would love that.
Well, I'm curious, one, thank you, Jessica and Caroline and Katie. Thank you so much for just so generously sharing your experience and your learnings along the way, and all the research that you've been doing, Katie. It's so incredibly helpful. So let's all give them some respect and love for coming and sharing so generously.
When we started, we always shared. We were always an open book to share everything that we did. We say, we'll tell you what we did. We tell you what we did wrong. And when Katie started this project in 2020, and because we always said, they said, well, aren't you afraid somebody's going to take your idea? And we said, well, no, because we need 10,000 of these, and we can't do it all. And so seeing everybody here today and seeing the work that Katie's done and Argus has done to share the model and build upon it, because we failed in a lot of ways. We found out a lot of things the hard way, but to see it grow and spread is just really one of the highlights of I guess my day or my work.
All right. Well, y'all, thank you so much. Katie, do you want to give one last shout out for some of the resources around the conference and the network?
Yes, I did throw it in the chat. I will copy and paste it again if anybody missed it. For those of you who are interested, again, in joining the National Farm Stop Slack channel, I threw that there, and I hope that these links work this time. Thank you to whoever pointed out that that was a broken link that I initially shared. I also am going to throw in Argus Farm Stop's website here as well. But again, the conference is February 13th through the 15th in Ann Arbor, 2026. We would love to see you all there. And yeah, if there's any additional way that I can support you, any additional resources that you need, please feel free to reach out. I'm also putting my contact information here for you guys as well. Okay, I think that should have gone through. So you have the National Farm Stop Slack channel, the conference website. I also put a link for local roots and for farmers in New Orleans and Argus, and then for myself as well. So if I can be of any service and any additional support to you all, please feel free to reach out. I am always available and always willing to sit down and have a chat. And thank you all so much for having us. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you three so much. And Emma, I think you might have an announcement or two. You want to
Yeah,
chime
I
in?
guess I'll close us out a little bit.
Mhm.
And all those things that Katie put in the chat, I'm gonna send a follow-up email with all of that in there. Also the recording from this. So if you weren't able to grab everything from the chat, I will send it out to you. And also you're welcome to share the recording with people that maybe you work with that weren't able to join. I just want to plug that IACD has a training coming up this Tuesday, diversified funding training on cultivating donors. So it's open to anybody. I think there's a lot of overlap here in terms of accessing money, which we all need. So I'm going to put the registration for that. If you're interested in joining, it's an hour training on the 30th, 2 to 3 Eastern time. So feel free. Oh, I just copy the whole thing. That's fine. So feel free to join us. That'd be really great to see as many of you there as possible. And that's it from me. I think, Susan, do you want to do a final closeout?
Yeah, no, thanks everybody for being here today. It's always such a delight to spend time with you, and we cover so many different kinds of topics. And hopefully, everybody just walks away feeling resourced and feeling the power of community and going back to that first cultural agreement of the FSLN that together we know a lot. So thanks everybody for bringing forward your wisdom. And thank you, Jessica, Katie, Caroline, for your time. And everybody, we'll see you next month.